Hey everybody, welcome back to Run and Gun. In this video, we're going to be editing some fall color photos in Adobe Lightroom. I'm going to show you how to make your fall color images really pop. And so I like to come on Instagram every now and then, get a little bit of inspiration. I don't like to copy and paste looks, but this is a great place to kind of get those gears turning in your brain, find some looks that you like, take little bits and pieces, and just kind of get inspired by the colors, the compositions, and some of the cool photos here on Instagram. So I like this photo of this waterfall up here, and yes, in Lightroom we're going to be editing a photo of a waterfall, so I kind of like the look. Let's hop into Lightroom. I kind of have an idea now of what I want my image to look like, and be sure to stick around till the end of the video because I have a little bonus Photoshop tip that's really going to take this image over the top. Here is our waterfall from Smoky Mountain National Park, and we have these kind of fall leaves that have fallen around here. Let's take a look at our settings right now. I shot this at 1/5 of a second at f/18, ISO 64, and this was shot on a 14-24 f2.8 lens at 14 millimeters. So here is our raw image, and we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start editing this photo. And I think what I'm gonna do for starters is crop this image in a little bit. I'm gonna go to our crop tool, and let's take a look at a 4x5. Let's bring it down just a little bit here. What I'm doing is I'm cropping out some of these highlights on the top. There we go, to make our focus really come in here towards the middle. And now I'm gonna start with my basic toning here on the right. I'm gonna turn up my exposure. Just a hint right there. That's starting to look pretty good. We can use a little contrast, but I'll come back and do that later. I may turn my highlights down a very, very tiny amount. Because again, if I turn down my highlights too far, you can see I'm affecting all of these highlights that I really enjoy here in the image, like on the rocks and in this waterfall here. So I don't want to turn those down too far, just very, very subtle amount. I'm going to come to my shadows. You can see there's quite a bit of detail here in the shadows that I'd like to see. A beginner mistake is to always crank up your shadows all the way, and we really don't want to do that. We want to leave a little bit of the detail to the imagination. So bring out just enough here so I can start seeing some of these little streams down here of water and some of this detail in here. But again, not too much. That's a pretty big beginner mistake that I like to avoid. Now we have our white point and our black point here. I can shift, double click, and it will automatically adjust that. And same thing here, shift, double click, and it will automatically adjust our black point. And I usually find that a good starting place, but I like to go in here and make some of my own edits. That looks pretty good. Turn my blacks down a little bit farther. That's looking pretty good there, and I'm loving the contrast so far in this image. So let's go ahead. Let's select a profile. I think I'm gonna go for Adobe Landscape. And as you can see, that makes our hues really just kind of pop off the page. Nice bright oranges in our fall colors, some nice saturated greens. That looks pretty good there so far. So if I go ahead and I hit backslash on the keyboard, you can see we have a fairly dull looking image, and we're starting to make those details pop out and make those colors stand out quite a bit. So I'm also going to turn up my vibrance ever so slightly. Again, beginner mistake is to crank it all the way, and that looks absolutely terrible. Let's bring that down quite a bit. Plus 30 is about as far as I want to go for this particular image. Again, everything you edit is up to your own taste, but this is just my particular taste. Now, a fun little thing we have here is these present sliders, and you can do quite a bit with these, but again, subtlety is key, and we don't want to be the person that goes ahead and slides something all the way to the right or all the way to the left. Those look terrible, especially clarity. None of this all the way to the right, all the way to the left kind of stuff. And again, same thing with texture. If you really look at these and you start cranking sliders all the way to the left and the right, you're just going to make people's eyes bleed. And look how soft that is. If we bring it all the way to the left, we just turn this image into mush. So we don't want to do that. Let's bring those back here. Again, you can double click on your little pointer here to reset these tabs, and we're just going to subtly take our dehaze slider, move it to the left. You can see we're getting just a touch of glow, and all I want is just that touch. See, that looks good right there. This was where we were at, and this is where we're going to take it to, just a touch of glow. And you can do the same thing with your clarity slider, just bringing it up a touch or down a touch. And so I'm going to bring it down about -10. That looks pretty good. And I don't think I really need to touch my texture slider. Go ahead and say that 10 times fast. But let's go ahead and we'll zoom in a little bit. And maybe we'll turn up our texture just a tiny bit. Very tiny bit, +20. Make some of these details pop just a hint. There we go. That added some nice sharpness to our image. I'm happy with that. The last thing I want to do is turn up our color temperature just a hint. Make it a tiny bit warmer. Again, subtlety is key. And we will add just a touch of contrast. Again, that's looking pretty good so far. Backslash for the before. And where we're at right now, I like where this is headed. So let's close our basic tab here. And we're going to take a look now at calibration. Now this is where the magic is going to happen in our fall colors edit. You can see all of these different options for playing with our shadows, our reds, our greens, and our blues, our RGB. We can shift our hues up here, our red, green, and blue, and we can also turn down the saturation. So if I want to turn down the saturation in my reds, you can see we're starting to lose our colors there. You can turn up the saturation. Again, you can always go too far with this. I don't want to do that. And likewise, I can do the same thing with our greens. I can kind of kill off our greens and I can make those really punchy. Again, same with blues, but we don't have too much blue in the image other than some of the reflections on the rock. So I'm going to leave the shadows alone in this case. I'm going to start to play with our hue for our red slider. Let's take that to the right a little bit. That makes our leaves kind of look a sickly yellow. I don't like that. If we take it to the left a little bit, yeah, I'm not really liking that red look either. So let's double click to reset that. Let's take a look at our blues. This is what I typically use with landscape. I'll drag it to the left just a touch and add some warmth in here to these guys, these leaves down here. So let's turn this off and turn it back on, and you can just see some subtle editing there. Turn up the saturation a tiny bit, and maybe I'll change some of our greens to yellow by turning the slider to the left. Turn up that saturation, and then we'll play with our blues just a touch more. That feels a little too saturated, so I'm going to bring down that saturation. So this is looking pretty darn good so far. I really like these deep burning oranges. Let's go ahead and let's turn off this tab, and we can see what our photo looks like before calibration and after our calibration. That's kind of how you use this calibration tab to do some color grading in your image. Now I'm going to go up to HSL, or Hue, Saturation, and Luminance tab, and I'm going to go and do some minor tweaks with this. I love this targeted adjustment tool where I can select it and select a hue I want, and then turn up the saturation or turn down the saturation, and hit Command Z. But that's a very helpful tool, especially for what we're doing here. I might go in and I might turn down some of these blues. So that targeted adjustment tool and turn down the saturation in those blue rocks. Not 100%, but I think that looks pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and let's zoom out. That looks better. That blue is a little distracting up here. I don't want a teal and orange look. I want this to look a little more natural. And so I'm thinking, I'm liking this image so far. Let's go ahead and go back to our basic tab for some other minor adjustments. Maybe I want the shadows to pop out just a hint more. Maybe I want a touch more contrast. I'll turn the exposure down a hint. And I really think that's looking awesome so far. Again, if we want to see the before and the after, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add a little more glow with our dehaze. Bring our black tones down a touch. And just kind of keep tweaking it till I get a fall colors image that I'm really starting to like. And now this is kind of looking like some of these photos I'm seeing here on Instagram. Again, don't copy and paste a look directly. Do something a little bit creative with a little bit of your own style. So I kind of like how this has just a touch of my own style to it. I'm going to turn my vibrance down a little bit, plus 10, that looks a little bit better. It's looking a little bit too saturated. So I'm liking this look so far. One thing I like to do is to check my contrast, so I'll hit the black and white tab, and I think this could use a little more contrast here in the foreground. So I'm going to go back to my color image, and I'm going to turn up my whites a touch. I need just a little more punch in this image. I'll go around and I will play with my highlights and my shadows. Turn up my highlights a touch. That's looking pretty good. And I think this image could also benefit from a vignette. So I'm going to go down to my effects tab, turn up a vignette. There we go. It's starting to add that contrast down here that I was looking for. Feather that vignette a little bit, bring in that midpoint. And if you really want to see what your vignette is doing, turn this feather all the way off. Now you can see a nice hard edge to your vignette. Really turn that amount down, and now you can see exactly where your vignette is laying on your image. It's a bit hard to see when it's very feathered out. So I'm going to bring in the midpoint to about right here. Make it a little more elliptical. And then I'm going to go ahead and now I will feather this and turn it back a little bit. So I think that looks pretty good. Here is before our vignette, just too bright around the edges. Here's after our vignette. One last thing to kind of finalize this image, I'm going to go to our tone curve, and I'm going to lift our shadows just a little bit to kind of give those shadows that lifted kind of grayed out look. Bring these down a touch, and I'll pop our highlights a little bit. Yeah, look at that. That really makes this image very contrasty. I like that. I think we're done here in Lightroom, but I have a little bonus for you guys if you want to stick around, and if you want to follow me over into Adobe Photoshop. I'm actually going to add some falling leaves to this image just to add a little more motion. I love the motion of this waterfall, but I think if we added some falling leaves, kind of like this image here on Instagram, they added some fake falling leaves, and I think we could do something kind of similar but a little more subtle in our photograph here of the waterfall. So let's right click. Let's go down to edit in Adobe Photoshop, and I will see you guys over in Photoshop. All right, so we are here in Adobe Photoshop. Here's our waterfall image, still looking pretty good. I have some other images I took on the same hike of some different leaves that I found, and these turned out pretty sharp, and these will work perfectly to cut out and add to our scene. So I'm going to cut out some of these leaves here. I can just simply use our lasso tool, or in this case, maybe a magnetic lasso tool, and just kind of go around the edge of our leaf. This doesn't have to be perfect by any means, because these are going to be fairly blurred out later. So we'll just kind of keep going around our edge. Get a basic selection of our leaf. Again, these will be fairly blurry, so don't spend all day chopping these out. Let's go up our stem just a little bit. Come on over to this side. And there we go, finish out our object. Now what I'm gonna do is hit Command C copy and Command V paste. Now I can take our leaf, we can drag it up into this composition and drop it right there. Let's get a couple more of these leaves, and I will meet you guys back here once I've cut out a couple more leaves. So we have a handful of leaves here cut out. We have 5 just to give us some variety, so it doesn't look like we have one leaf copy and pasted over and over again. That would just add to the realism of this. So I'm going to throw these leaves in a quick group. Call these leaves. I always like to keep my layers here clean in Photoshop. So let's work with one leaf at a time. Here's a nice red leaf. I'll take him. He can sit over here somewhere. Maybe I'll scale this leaf down just a touch. He can sit over in the background. Actually, let's duplicate him a couple times. I'll get a couple of these leaves, turn that off. We'll scale this one down a little bit. Scale him down, throw him over there, rotate him a little bit. That looks good. Take this other leaf. Scale him down. Rotate him a little bit. Maybe we'll even throw some perspective distortion on this leaf just a little bit. Maybe he's falling kind of this way. That looks good. Rotate him around a little bit. That's fine. Maybe we'll change the hue on this leaf just a little bit. We'll make him orange. I like that. Turn this leaf on. And again, you can add as many leaves as you want here. Rotate them however you would like. Maybe this one's kind of falling out of frame there. That looks pretty good. Let's turn on our big leaf over here. There we go. That's a pretty big guy. We'll scale him down a touch. Throw a little perspective on him via our transform tool. Kind of like he's going back that way. Let's throw him down here. That looks good. Rotate him a little bit. He'll be over here. Let's duplicate this guy, throw him, and we'll throw him back there, make him really small. Gotta have some different perspectives over here. He's back there a little bit. And again, we don't want those to match up, so we'll rotate him a little bit. Maybe we'll change his hue just a touch. Ooh, yeah, nice saturated red. Maybe he's gonna be like a little more orangey yellow. That looks good. And let's turn on some of these other leaves. Here we go. This very nice red leaf over here. Let's scale him down a touch. And maybe we'll throw some perspective on him as well. Falling like this. That looks pretty good. And let's see our last leaf here. Let's completely flip him upside down, and we can have him over here. So now we have our leaves. Those look pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start blurring these leaves out a little bit. Some of these guys in the foreground can have a little more depth of field blur on them. So I'll go to Filter, Blur, and we'll select our blur and blur them out in the foreground a little bit. That looks good. I'll do the same thing to this guy over here. You can just select that, blur these leaves. Blur out maybe some of these guys in the foreground up here just a touch. We just have to find the leaf. There it is. Add just a touch of blur. That looks good. Now we're going to add some blur to make it look like these leaves are falling. So let's add some directional blur. And in Photoshop, that's called motion blur. And we'll angle it a little bit. Don't want to add too much. That looks good. We're looking at that guy right there. That looks good. Now we're going to add some to this leaf. Maybe I want to add him up here a little bit. Leaf over here. Filter, blur. motion blur. A little bit less on this guy. That looks good. This tiny leaf in the background. Now things are going to blur less the farther away they are from the camera. So since this is a little bit farther away, it's going to blur a little bit less. That looks all right. And then stuff very close to the lens is, in terms of perspective, blurring a lot more. So we're going to filter, blur, motion blur. And this guy is going to be quite blurry. Maybe we'll change the angle on him just a little bit. That looks good. Maybe he's kind of falling right. Maybe he's over there. That looks good. Okay, got a couple more. This guy kind of fell off our radar over here. Let's add some blur to him. That looks good. Nice and saturated. Maybe he'll... Let's see. Maybe he can come down there a little bit, cover up some of that shadow there, give us a little more hue in this image. Filter, motion blur. That looks good. I'm going to rotate this guy just a touch. That looks good. And our last leaf here, we'll add motion blur. Add a little more motion blur. Good, add some rotation. Actually want to scale him up a little bit, kind of falling to the side. And now we have added some falling leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and Command E, combine this layer and play with our curves just a touch to add some contrast to our falling leaves, darken them up a little bit and make them really feel like they are in this scene. Add some contrast to our highlights, really make these highlights pop. Bring down those shadows just a touch, and they're feeling a little oversaturated now compared to the rest of our image. So I'm going to bring down the saturation on these leaves just a touch. And now it looks like we have some falling leaves in our image. We can bring those up and down, on or off. And I'm going to actually add some kind of orangey yellow hues to these leaves. See the preview of the before and after. You can see they were feeling very red. We're going to make them a little more orange, and I think that makes them kind of blend in with this image a little bit better. Maybe turn down the opacity just a touch. That's a little too much. Right there, 93% looks good. And now we've added some falling leaves to our image, and I'm really happy with the way this turned out. If you enjoyed this editing tutorial and learned something, be sure to share it with a friend. And as always, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. And be sure to turn on that notification bell so you're getting updated when I drop new editing and photography videos. So until next time, get out and go shoot.